on to this?
Well, I can say with absolute certainty that the People's National Congress has always stood on the side of law and order, and that we have never received dirty money, we've never received money from criminals, we've never been a beneficiary of the proceeds of crime. So I cannot say what Mr. Rohee is talking about. It is well established that persons such as Roger Khan, who has been convicted in another jurisdiction for cocaine trafficking and other crimes, was a close associate of the People's Progressive Party. He actually published a whole-page advertisement in the newspaper stating that he's collaborating with the police under the PPP in what he called crime fighting. So when it comes to criminality, the People's National Congress certainly has never been a beneficiary of any proceeds from crime. So I don't know what he's talking about.
He even made mention of the 2002 jailbreak when this is him again making another allegation saying that these persons were actually hailed as freedom fighters by the PNC, and he also drew attention to Mr. Hoyt's attendance at Lyndon London Blackie's funeral back at that during that time. So and the fact that he says the opposition PNC at this point in time continues to put up roadblocks to the certain government programs and projects, and then he made mention specifically of the AML-CFT legislation.
Okay, that's a long question. In the first instance, it is David Granger, as leader of the opposition, who has brought a motion to investigate all of the deaths that occurred between 2000 and 2010. It was the Speaker who altered my motion to 2004, but had a good reason for putting it to 2010. That is to say, that was the year in which Lyndon Blackie London was killed. Now, as far as the association of Mr. Hoyt, the former leader of the PNCR, with that event is concerned, the entire country was outraged at the manner in which Lyndon London was killed. Even though he was a wanted man, there was footage, live footage, broadcast on a television station showing him leaving the premises with his hands in the air. In fact, he was a close friend of an army officer, Captain McAllister, who was on the ground at the time, and he was shot down in cold blood by the police, and thousands of people saw that on the television screen. So Mr. Hoyt had nothing to do with any allegations against Mr. Lyndon London, but everyone was disturbed that the police, in the full glare of the camera, with a huge crowd, could shoot a man with his hands in the air in cold blood. And that was what Mr. Hoyt was concerned about. It was a humane matter. I don't know that the people who speak about London, I know that he was a wanted man. I don't know what he's actually convicted of, but I think Mr. Hoyt's behavior concerned the inhumane nature of his death. In the second instance, the PNC was never accused of having anything to do with the persons who broke out of jail in 2002, Mashramali, the 23rd of February. And the party certainly never benefited from anything that it did. We have always condemned criminal behavior. And what we do know is that in the years following that breakout, there were numerous massacres. But I'd like to call your attention and Mr. Rohee's attention to the fact that the head of the Presidential Secretariat, who is also Secretary of the Defense Board, and is also Chairman of the Central Intelligence Committee, described that entire episode as a drug gang warfare. So it was a war between drug gangs. And if you look back, you'll see that several monuments have been erected to the memory of people who were killed by Phantom Squad. PNC had nothing to do with that. This was a matter for drug lords, and those words came out of the mouth of Dr. Roger Luncheon. There's a monument down in Ivlery, there's a monument at Bartica, there's a monument in Buxton to the people who were killed during that rampage. So the PPP has to accept responsibility for the troubles that occurred during that period. And let me make it clear, there were 15 interventions, mainly by the United Kingdom Department for International Development, 15 interventions providing recommendations, agreements, assistance for the reform of the police force. Mr. Gadraj was at one stage brought before a commission of inquiry, a presidential commission of inquiry. He's forced to resign because of his involvement in the troubles. In fact, the wording of the presidential commission of inquiry spoke of his being involved in the conduct of a death squad. So when we're talking about the criminal period that followed the 2002 jailbreak, we're speaking about PPP activity. We're speaking about people who boasted of their links with the PPP. So that's my response to the question you asked about Blackie London and Mr. Hoyt's involvement, and also the troubles in the wake of the jailbreak. Now, the words about liberation, freedom fighters, those were not words spoken by Mr. Hoyt. Those were words attributed to a certain politically prominent person of another party. Mr. Hoyt never used those words to my recollection. So I think Mr. Rohee has missed his source there. He must go and check back his sources. But those were not Mr. Hoyt's words. Those were not the words of any PNC leader at that time. I think people need to understand what took place in those over that period. At no other period of Guyanese history were so many policemen killed, because the policemen were being used by the political directorate to pursue an agenda which had nothing to do with law enforcement. And there was abundant evidence that officials were collaborating with Roger Khan. There's abundant evidence that a certain highly placed official actually used the letterhead of a government letterhead to acquire electronic tracking equipment to allow the criminals to pinpoint cell phones. And after that was done, people were hunted down like dogs. That was not the PNC's doing. I would like an inquiry into that entire period, and I called for one. I'm concerned with the deaths. This was the period in which a minister of the government, Saturday Saw, was executed. And up to now, the government has not even conducted an inquest into the death of a minister, the assassination of a minister. What can explain that? What can explain that? Let Mr. Rohee explain that.
And more recently, Mr. Granger, there is a photograph of you, it was on the social media site on the account of the now deceased gunman, Kevin Fields. He's saying this too is also evidence that the PNC is associated with criminal elements. Now my question is, do you recall when that photograph was taken? Did you even know that the photograph was taken?
I recall the event because I went to the village of Agricola to attend the funeral of Shaheed Grant. At a certain point during the ceremony, I embraced his mother, and a strange young man brought her a bottle of water. I never spoke to the young man, I never asked for water, and that is all I know. The snapshot would show that I was wearing a black shirt and that my arm was around the mother of Shaheed Grant. I meet thousands of people every time I go out. I don't ask them to identify themselves. I don't know that the picture was taken, and I certainly was not responsible for posting it in social media. Everywhere I go, I meet people, and I embrace a lot of people.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you.